Good morning, everybody. So I don't know about you guys, but I am glad to have 2023 in the rearview mirror. 2023 was a struggle for me, both professionally as well as personally. And on the professional side, it seemed like last year, not only was the volume extremely slow, which was frustrating, but it also ended up that I ended up being the proverbial bridesmaid on pretty much every major deal that ended up happening last year amongst numerous brokers. And unfortunately, I was not a pretty bridesmaid. I was the one that walks into the church and everybody has a collective gasp because the dresses are so hideous. So, um, you know, you I've been around forever, and I appreciate that nobody gets 100% of all the listings out there. That would be so cool if you could. And so I know you're going to lose some deals here and there, but when they start kind of piling up, what you end up finding is you're kind of like in this downward spiral. And so for myself, I go through these phases. I start in the disappointing phase, and then I move to the angry phase, and then I move to the frustration phase. And finally, I end up in the world's largest self-pity party. Now, for those of you, there's a couple of you here in the audience that I talk to on a regular basis. I'm just going to apologize for the first 8 months of last year because I was pretty Mr. Negative. So I apologize. But the good thing is I somehow found strength in the personal challenges I was going through. And I will share those here in just a few minutes once we get through talking about the numbers. But the first thing I want to do is there's two transactions that occurred last year that I want to talk about because they really impacted the overall market. And until you understand those two deals, it's going to be hard to put the context of the market as far as what happened in a lighted position. So the first deal we're going to talk about here is the Golden Valley Apartments. This is out at 600 Hosking. There are a total of 84 fourplexes that were built in this development between 2005 to 2006. Originally, the developer was selling these between 725 and 775. And he did pretty well at the beginning, but he sold his last building on the day that Jasmine Park opened in the northwest area of Bakersfield. Because once Jasmine Park opened, he did not sell another building from 2007 until 2020, at which point he sold 4 buildings. And that is despite being on the market the entire length of time. But there was a disconnect. So, for example, 2 years ago, Phil Jordan sold a building in there for $775. That was a single standalone fourplex. At the same time, the developer, though, had his entire portfolio, which was about 38 buildings, on the market for $1.4 million per fourplex. So you could buy them in bulk and pay a premium of basically twice, or you could buy them individually and pay half price. So there was obviously a reason they weren't selling. And what was really interesting is the guy would call me every couple of years and, try to pimp me for information. And it got to a point where I was pretty point blank with my conversations. And I'd go, well, why are yours worth twice everybody else's in there? And it's the identical product with the identical income. And the only answer that he could give me is, well, because I own them. So thus he didn't sell anything. Well, we fast forward to last year. He was offering third-party management in the development. Something happened in March of last year. He got rid of all the third-party management. We get to the summer. He sells 20 buildings to one person for $795 a piece. And then he sells the balance of his entire portfolio for $847 to individual investors. And so, kind of a unique scenario, but it is definitely noteworthy for how much volume was sold in that development last year. Our next unique sell is Coyote Run. Eric and Esteban handled this transaction last year. This was a duplex concept, 27 buildings. They brought it out on the market during the lease-up phase. My understanding, they had multiple offers on it. It ended up going to a farmer out of Visalia who was represented by a residential agent out of Pismo. The gentleman, I'm going to assume, was probably in a 1031 exchange because he paid all cash. And because of the fact that they sold all 27 buildings together, that falls into my category because I only track stuff that is fourplexes and larger. And so when they closed this deal, this closed at $288,000 a door, which broke the all-time record. It didn't just break the all-time record, it shattered the record. So the previous record was 255, and that was for a Jasmine Park fourplex, and this is 288 a door. So they're now selling in the Northwest, as well as they will soon be selling another similar development in the Southwest. So I wanted to bring both of these up to you before I jump into the overall numbers in order to kind of keep in mind of what's going on in the market. So total sales volume for this past year was 127 million. This is down 13%. Now, if those two transactions had not occurred, the market would have been down to 47, or would have been down by 47 million. And so that would have put us all the way back to the 2014 sales volume. So those two transactions in and of themselves were very significant in our overall sales volume for 2023. Total number of units sold, 840. This number was down 26%. Our gross rent multiplier, we fell from 12.06 down to 11.4. The average cap rate was 4.97. Now, I think this is pretty funny because any buyers that called last year, when you'd ask them what their cap rate expectation was, every single one of them would tell you 6%. And yet clearly we are a long way from 6% to finish up at 4.97. The range of cap rates that we saw last year, the lowest one was 0.14%, with the highest being 10.32%. Our average price per unit in the fourplex market, this rose for the 12th year in a row. We were up 17%, finishing the year at 156,412. And the bulk of that, I'm going to say, could be attributed to the Golden Valley sale. The 5 to 30 units was the only size range that actually had a reduction last year, and it wasn't really much of a reduction. It was less than 1%. It was actually 0.3%, ending the year at 107,969. Our 31 plus had the biggest gain thanks to Coyote Run. We were up 83%. Average price now in the 31 plus units is 209,117. So this chart looks at the last 20 years as well as what the overall average price per unit was in the market. That price was 145,176. It represented a 15.45% increase. The thing that's really interesting about this is I follow a lot of national periodicals that talk about the major markets in the United States. Read one just like 2 days ago, and they were saying the average high to the current price right now is a 20% drop nationally. I will bet you there is not a single market of any size in the United States that had double-digit appreciation last year. We are probably the only place in the country. So that is significant. Our 15.45% obviously is big in any year, but especially last year with such a low volume, that's a significant number. If the two deals in Golden Valley and Coyote Run had not occurred last year, our market would have only had 0.09%, so less than 1% appreciation rate. And if we look at the overall for the last 20 years, right now we stand at 6.01% appreciation over the last 20 years. It's going to get really interesting shortly because we're going to be moving through that 2005, 2006 point where the market really had that sharp incline and then fell. So it's going to be the next couple of years fascinating to watch what that average for the 20-year goes to. So we've already kind of touched upon this. Obviously, these are the high points. So now we have all new records established in 2023, except for the 5 to 30 range. Citywide vacancy, 2.17% in the first quarter, 2.73 in the second, 2.2 in the third, and 4.03 in the fourth. What is interesting is the rent growth. So 3 years ago, we had been previously, actually 4 years ago, we were at 15%. We fell to 12% 3 years ago. 2 years ago, we had 8% rent growth. This most recent year, we only had 4% rent growth. So the rent growth is really slowing down in our current market. And part of the reason for that is in the Class A buildings, they've gone 5 consecutive quarters now with little to no rent growth at all, meaning that that market is completely tapped out. You know, the wages in Kern County are not enough to support where the Class A market has ended up at. In the Class B and C, which is the bulk of our inventory in Bakersfield, the first 3 quarters last year were very strong. But we got to the fourth quarter and all of a sudden the market changed. And so what I ended up is I've got approximately 14,000 units that participate in my rent survey. And those that are B and C, which is the majority of them, I actually had half of them raising rents in the fourth quarter, and I had half of them actually reducing rents. So I think what that says to me is that the Class B and C residents, they are also now reaching a threshold where their wages no longer support additional rent growth. So I think that that's one of the reasons why we're continuing to see every year that this decline is occurring. New construction last year, we only had 107 new units come online. Yet there are numerous buildings that are in the development pipeline. So this number will be significantly higher next year when I report back to you. So our 2023 storylines, there's 3 of them we're going to talk about today. The first one is the market. Are we at a crossroads? The second one is insurance. And the third one is the transaction characteristics. So let's talk about the market. 3 years ago, I stood in front of this audience and I told you guys that in Sacramento, they were no longer having cash flow on their purchases. The purchases had transitioned over to being you were strictly buying buildings for appreciation. And I speculated at that time, I wonder if this could ever happen to Bakersfield and make its way down the Central Valley, and that ultimately we would come like the rest of California. Well, looking at some of these transactions that occurred last year, when you start factoring in the new property taxes and you start factoring in interest rates in the 7 to 8% range, it makes you wonder, is there any cash flow left out there? Or people, are they strictly buying here for appreciation? The other alternative, and having been here for 30 plus years now and seen multiple market cycles, you've got to wonder, is it just that Bakersfield is doing like it's always done, where we trail the national market anywhere from 12 to 18 to 24 months behind? And I read another article this week that was talking to a lot of the national institutional investors in multifamily, and the national institutional investors are saying that in their opinion, the prices are still falling. They can see the bottom now, but we haven't yet hit the bottom. So it makes you wonder, if the primary markets are all still falling and we're climbing, does this mean at some point we are going to change directions and go down? I will leave that up to everybody in this room to make that determination, because unfortunately, I do not have a crystal ball on that particular item. So our next issue is insurance. Obviously, last year, the residential side got all the attention on insurance because everybody heard State Farm was leaving, Farmers was leaving. It was next to impossible to find insurance policies. Well, the thing you didn't hear about is the multifamily world. The multifamily world is in a crisis at the moment as far as insurance goes. So nationally, premiums have gone up on average 35% in 2023. In Florida, Louisiana, Texas, and California, we are seeing premiums increase 300 to 400%. And that's assuming you can get insurance. And part of the problem here in California is we really only have two legitimate companies that are active in this space. One is AmTrust. They will only insure buildings that are 15 years or newer. And the other one is CIG. And CIG has been the go-to company for multifamily insurance for a long time. They used to take anybody, but now they realize that they are the only game in town. And so CIG has become more difficult. So now they're coming back to you and they're saying, well, first thing we need to see is 5 years loss run immediately. If you've got any claims for 5 years, you're pretty much ineligible for insurance. Second thing they're going to say is, when's the last time you replaced your roof? Third thing they're going to ask is, have you replaced your electrical panels and wiring? Fourth thing is going to be, have you replaced your plumbing? And the last one's going to be your HVAC systems. So those are all boxes that you've got to answer that, yes, I've done all that stuff for them to talk to you about getting insurance. Obviously, this is now starting to impact the resale market. My last 3 or 4 deals, even though we saw this coming and we started early on finding insurance, we still got down to the very closing point, and all of a sudden we can't get insurance. And it was delaying the deals. I had one that got delayed 45 extra days strictly for trying to find insurance. So this is a challenge that our industry really started to deal with last year, and we are certainly continuing to do so right now. So let's talk about these deals. There weren't many deals last year, but the deals had some pretty interesting characteristics. So the first one is your financing. So the thing that jumps out at me is, everybody cried and whined and complained about the fact that interest rates were now in the 7 to 8% range for multifamily. And yet 52% of the borrowers got those loans. And I find this interesting because 3 years ago, it would have been like 80% of the people were paying cash. So the cash buyers have disappeared, and the people who are buying are comfortable paying that 7 to 8% right now. So we saw a huge increase in the conventional loans. The other thing I find interesting on this is the seller financing. We have not seen seller financing for a long time, and yet last year it accounted for 8% of our transactions. When we look at the buyer characteristics, first thing that jumps out at you is 68% of the deals done last year were by people from out of the area. So think about that. Essentially, 7 out of 10 deals is a buyer from out of the area. So it begs the question, what do they know that we don't know? Or what do we know and they don't know? So that is the $1 million question. Other things that I find noteworthy, 40% of the transactions involve out-of-area brokers, also known as carpetbaggers. I guess they want to come here because they think that we're all country bumpkins and they're going to teach us how to do real estate. But it bothers me that to have that many transactions done by out-of-area brokers in our market. I mean, why are we not doing more deals instead of them? And then finally, the last two I find really fascinating. So 61 out of the 93 agents that represented buyers last year had little to no multifamily experience at all. And on the sell side, 58 out of 93 had little to no multifamily experience. So much for the realtor code of conduct that you are supposed to be an expert in your field when we have these kind of percentages representing buyers and sellers in a specialty like this. So the forecast for this year, I think that we're going to have a lot less volume the first half of the year. I know of only one major transaction that's pending right now, but it's certainly not enough to make any serious dent into the overall volume for the first half. I think a lot of people got very excited in December when they started talking that the Fed was going to lower rates. And everybody thought, wow, this whole year is just going to be on fire. And then here recently, as we're starting to get some of the statistical information out of the government as far as inflation goes, now we're starting to see that, you know what, it's probably not going to be the first half of the year. Those rate decreases will more than likely be in the second half. So I think whatever volume we're going to have this year will probably occur in the second half, but I am not anticipating a huge year this year. I think if we break 100 million, it will be, it will require a very special or a very large deal in which needs to occur. Definitely feel like we're going to have slower rent growth for two reasons. One, as I mentioned, there's a lot of new units coming online this year, which are going to take away some of the inventory from those existing buildings, especially kind of the class A minus B plus buildings. Some of those people will transition into A buildings. And then if they do lower interest rates in the second half of the year, then I think what we're going to find is, we're going to lose some of those residents who are renting. They will all of a sudden now become home buyers. And so as the vacancy rate starts to increase, it's going to make it very difficult on landlords to start, to continue increasing rents. One of the other things that's also interesting, I'll note on the rent growth. So 60 days ago, the Housing Authority sent out a notice to all landlords here in Kern County that until they receive further funding, there are no rent increases in Section 8 housing. So if that's something that you are dealing in, you need to be aware that, if you're representing a buyer and they're thinking, oh, great, I'm going to go in there and raise those Section 8s, there is no money right now. And until they get more funding, that's not going to occur. So important to keep that in mind. And continued struggles with property insurance. So I don't have to tell you, but landlords are not very popular anywhere. We kind of rate down there with used car salespeople and politicians. And so nobody's going to feel any sympathy or empathy towards a landlord who has to pay more for property insurance or who can't get insurance. And so nobody's running out there right now trying to solve this insurance crisis in the multifamily and the commercial world. What we're seeing, though, is there's more concern in the residential side. And my hope is that if the residential side gets bad enough, the government will step in and start to take action in order to help the insurance situation. And really where the insurance problem exists, it's not on the state farms, it's not on the farmers, it's on those companies that insure them. So the reinsurance market. And the reinsurance market is struggling because there's been so many natural disasters, especially in the 4 states that I named earlier, that we've had several of those companies have gone bankrupt. And those that are still remaining in the market, they are struggling financially. And so that's why they're pushing back so much on this insurance issue. So the likely scenario is the government will probably have to step in. They will prop up one way or the other the reinsurance market, but they will probably negotiate some sort of terms like, hey, we'll prop you guys up, but you can't abandon Florida, Louisiana, Texas, and California. And hopefully our industry will be able to hitch their wagon to the residential side of it, and we will see some relief. But what I have heard is there will be no relief for us in 2024. The best case scenario is hopefully 2025. So as I mentioned to you guys earlier, obviously 2023 was a struggle for me professionally, but I also had some pretty significant struggles in 2023 personally. So I had 2 friends that passed away. My 84-year-old mother, who was already in assisted living, fell, broke her hip, which, when you're that age and you break a hip, it is certainly not good. Her surgery ended up exacerbating her dementia. Now she's in memory care. But kind of the thing that really capped the year was at ASU, my best friend for the last 27 years, last August, had a major stroke. And on top of everything I was struggling with professionally, now I've got all these other things personally. And it's just like, wow, felt like I had kind of the weight of the world on me. So one night, the night after the stroke occurred, it was my turn to put my 6-year-old, well, 5-year-old daughter at the time down to bed. And so I tuck her in, I read her story, kiss her goodnight, and she doesn't want me to leave the room until she falls asleep. So I'm sitting in the dark and I'm strolling on my phone, and I come across this reel that this guy posted here, this Jesse Itzler. Jesse Itzler is a serial entrepreneur. He was the one that created Marquis Jets that eventually got sold to NetJets. He's an ultra marathoner. He rode his bike across the US a year ago, public speaker kind of guy. And I'd never heard of this guy. I have no idea why or how he showed up on my reel, but it was very fortuitous that he did at that exact moment, because he was talking about a friend of his who had just turned 50. Now, mind you, last August, when I'm reading this, I'm 56. And so when you hear the math here in a second, his buddy is talking about turning 50, and he acknowledges or finds out that the average US male only lives to be 78 years old. And so he's doing the math and he goes, wow, I only have 330 months that I will probably be here to enjoy my loved ones and my friends. And yet my entire life is shifted or focused on my work and not focused on living. And so his friend came up with this system of planning or making a point to plan 2 major events a year with family and friends that are at least a week to 2 weeks in length, and then 6 extended weekends that he's going to do with family and friends to try to shift that balance away from the work as being the primary focus to being with his family and friends who he has this limited time with. And I'm reading this and I'm staring at my daughter and I'm just going, what the heck am I doing here? Feeling sorry for myself. My best friend is in ICU. I've lost these other people. This is ridiculous, because one bad year, I should say, professionally does not define a career, and one bad year personally does not define a lifetime. So at that exact moment, I just thought, you know what? I'm moving forward. And so the pity party was over. I picked myself up and we start moving forward. So last year, I finished my presentation with a story about a friend of mine who's a landlord, business partner, client. And I was sharing with you guys about he had this huge respect for his on-site manager and his tenants, to the point that when I sold a building for him 2 years ago, he ended up leaving over $300,000 on the table. And I was surprised, I guess pleasantly surprised, that it seemed to tug at a lot of heartstrings, because I had numerous people come up to me afterwards and say how much it meant to them and that they enjoyed that story. I had several people send me emails, and I even had one person write me a personal note afterwards. And despite all of that positive encouragement, I actually had decided not to do that type of story this year. But 3 weeks ago, I ended up getting a phone call from an adult son of a client of mine, informing me that his dad, who was 86 and had been battling cancer, had passed away. And this particular gentleman was very important in my life, because he was the first client I ever dealt with that I did multiple transactions with. And he was a really interesting guy. He obviously became a client first, then he became kind of a friend, and then he became a mentor. And Chuck was a restaurant guy. He owned 7 Taco Bells and 3 Sizzlers down in Los Angeles. And for some reason, PepsiCo came to him and said, look, we want to buy all 7 of your Taco Bells. And at the same time, somebody came to him and said, you know what, we're also going to buy your Sizzlers. And so he came into a lump sum of money. And for whatever reason, And I can't remember because it's been so long ago. We somehow connected really early on in my career. And we had all of these adventures over the years because I think he ended up ultimately buying 6 buildings from me. I then turned around ultimately and sold the 6 buildings for him. But we probably chased another 4 or 5 buildings. And so even though I wasn't going to go down that path and tell these type of stories, I thought, you know what, in order to honor Chuck, I'm going to share 2 quick stories with you to wrap up today. So the very first deal that Chuck bought in Bakersfield, he bought a property from Tom Coleman. For those of you who don't know who Tom Coleman was, Tom was the owner of Coleman Homes, and Coleman Homes was probably the largest single-family home building company in Bakersfield. And if you ever want a really interesting exercise, is start asking around of the people who worked at Coleman Homes and what became of them in this industry. Rock stars. I mean, this was a company that was like a factory of building rock stars. They became developers, became contractors, became brokers. I mean, these individuals that worked for Tom were just all superstars. Well, Tom was a very prolific apartment builder in Southwest Bakersfield. So he built the Springs, he built Mesa Creek, he built South Green. So a lot of the well-known buildings in Southwest, he was the builder of them. But his very first building was built at the corner of Stein and Apple Blossom. There's 2 side-by-side 20-unit buildings. He built one for himself and one for a client. And so we went to Tom and we got the first one under contract. And contract was scheduled to close right around the holidays. And so keep in mind, this is early in my career and I am broke as hell. And I really need the money out of this deal. But we get within 5 days of closing, and Tom had a property manager named Gary, and that was my point of contact. And Gary calls me up and he goes, Mark, hey, he says, I got good news and I got bad news. What would you like to hear first? And I go, well, let's hear the bad news first. We'll try to finish on a good note. And he says, well, the bad news is this. The property caught fire last night. Ouch. And I said, well, what is the good news then? He says, well, the good news is this. Your buyer's going to get 3 brand new units out of it. The only thing is he's got to wait 90 days to close escrow. So I go to Chuck and I tell him this, and you know what? Chuck was pretty happy about that, to get 3 brand new units. Unfortunately, his broker was not so happy, but I still needed the money 90 days later, and we ultimately got that closed, and that was our first deal. So the second story I want to share with you is probably my all-time Chuck story. So a guy in my office tells me he's got a friend who owns this building, 26-unit building, and his buddy wants to talk to me about selling. So I go to meet with the guy, and the guy says, look, he goes, I built this building. I handle the leasing of this building. I do all the maintenance of this building, but I have a partner who handles all of the bills for this property. And my partner has failed to pay the property taxes for 5 years. Now, those of you who remember, 5 years puts you in tax default, and the county can take your property. But the lender on this decided, you know what, we're going to step in, we are going to cure the back taxes, and we're going to put you in foreclosure. So at the point that I met with this client, he's in foreclosure. And so I look at his numbers, we walk the property, and at this time in the market, he was totally upside down. And there was absolutely nothing I could do to help him. So I thank him for letting me take a look at it. He's very appreciative of my time. And he says, well, maybe you can find a buyer for it and sell it for the bank. I'm like, I'm already on that. So I go back, I contact the bank. The bank says, look, he goes, you know, we're happy to list it with you. We're going to get it back in a couple of weeks. And, but he goes, instead of listing it with you, we'd be much happier if you just bring us a buyer. Well, I knew that this property checked all the boxes for Chuck. It was medium size. It was actually in really good condition. It had that distressed sell element to it. So that means he was going to get a bargain on it. So it checked all the boxes. So I get a hold of Chuck. Chuck's super excited about it. He goes, yeah, we're going to buy it. So fast forward to a couple days before the sale. It was a Friday, and the sale was going to take place on a Monday. And the owner of the property calls me that Friday. I'm thinking, why is he calling me? And he's like, hey, Mark, I just want to let you know. He goes, the foreclosure sale is going to take place on Monday, and I'm going to be there because I want to see if anybody's going to buy my building. And, I just want to say goodbye to it. I'm like, okay. And he goes, maybe you should be there. And I go, well, I plan to be there. And he goes, well, did you find a buyer? And I said, yes, I did find a buyer. And he goes, well, I own the property next door. He goes, we're going to be neighbors. I go, great. And he goes, I'll tell you what. He says, why don't you tell your buyer to meet me at the property on Sunday morning? I will walk him around the property. I will introduce him to all the residents, and I'll be a good neighbor. I'm like, awesome. So I call Chuck up. Sunday morning rolls around, 9 a.m. It is raining, it is foggy, and it is cold. We walk all the units. Now, at this point, a third of these units are vacant by this point. The other 2/3 are occupied. So we finished the walkthrough. We're standing at the curb. The owner says to Chuck, he goes, Chuck, what do you think of the building? Chuck goes, wow, I really like it. This is a great property. It's in great condition. He goes, great. Do you have any questions? And Chuck kind of looks at the ground and he goes, yeah, I got one question. Where are all the men? And he goes, I looked around. I didn't see a single man anywhere on this property. There were no men clothing. There is no trait of any men on this property. And the owner gets this big grin, ear to ear, baby. And he's shaking his head and he goes, well, that's an interesting story. He goes, he says, I'm out and about every day. So he says, every morning I eat breakfast out. Every lunch I eat lunch out. And occasionally I eat dinner out. And when I go to eat out, I always run into women who are down on their luck. And they all have a sob story. And he says, one of the biggest complaints that they all have is they don't have a place to live. And I go, you are in luck because I own 26 units. You can move into my building. The only problem is most of them don't have any money. So I have to collect rent in other ways. And the moment he said that, Chuck is over there going, no, 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 I am not collecting rent that way. And the guy just smiled and he goes, well, it's worked for me. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, so says the guy that's losing a building in 24 hours to foreclosure. So folks, thank you very much.